So let's talk about Eldritch Storm, the enormous mortal wound bomb that Farseers are going to be able to deploy to blast the enemies of the Eldar off the board. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking more Eldar news. The Codex is up for pre-order very soon, and I thought we'd talk about one really quite interesting leaked rule that can potentially have Farseers causing mortal wound carnage at a fairly long range. I will hopefully be getting a Codex Eldari review out as soon as I can. I suspect I'm going to be a little bit behind some of the rest of the reviews. I'm hoping that I should have that completed sometime early next week. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you would like to see a full review of the Eldar Codex. In any case, Eldritch Storm used to be a psychic power that you could cast in previous editions of the game. It's long been something in the game of 40k. I believe previously they used one of the large blast markers, and it was a bit of an area effect attack. It's been conspicuously missing from the Eldar Codex and the updated rules via Psychic Awakening, but it seems that Games Workshop have added it back into the Codex, and it does look fairly potent. So rather than being a psychic power, Eldritch Storm now appears to be a stratagem, and it does seem that it's at least somewhat going for a similar kind of rule as the Orbital Strike or various other big bombardment stratagems that pay a bunch of points to try and get the enemy to clear an area, and they've got a turn to get out of the way. Generally speaking, it does seem quite similar. It's a one-use only stratagem, and it's 3 command points, so it is very pricey indeed, and it seems to be going for the same sort of thing that the others are. But as best I can tell, it does appear that the damage happens on the same turn, so your opponent doesn't have the chance to run away from all of the frightful eldritch energy. I do kind of wonder whether or not this was intended. You declare the stratagem in the command phase, it tells you about doing a psychic action in the psychic phase, and then it says that the damage goes off in your next shooting phase. I don't know if with the word next they were trying to imply next turn, but at least currently, rules as written, your next shooting phase is the one that's immediately after that psychic phase. So it does seem to mean that unless Games Workshop FAQs this, it does sound like the damage goes down in the exact same turn, kind of making it into the equivalent of the ultimate Eldar psychic spell. This is the stratagem itself, the image leaked to the Eldari Discord server, where it appears that at least one person there does seem to have a copy of the new Codex, and have been posting a whole bunch of leaks and things piecemeal. I'll link them down in the video description. In any case, Eldritch Storm costs 3 command points, you use it in the command phase, and you must select a point within 24 inches of one of your Farseer models on the battlefield and place a marker on that point. It basically means that in terms of the range of this thing, you're not going to be immediately able to catapult it into the enemy's deployment zone turn 1, not unless you've got a Farseer right on the edge of your deployment zone, and even then most of the time it's going to be on the line of the opponent's one. I can see this being used as a bit more of a turn 2 thing perhaps. In any case, after nominating that point, come the shooting phase, every single unit within 6 inches of that point will take D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2+, which even just by itself is pretty impressive damage, and could potentially be enough to justify the 3 command points investment on its own. The main limitation is it being a little bit less effective on infantry characters, getting -2 on that roll, so it's usually only going to affect them on a 4+. Even without the Farseers boosting it in any way, it still has the potential for quite a lot of damage, I think. Say if you manage to throw this down on an enemy castle in a line of sight blocking ruin, maybe you might be able to catch 4 units and a couple of infantry characters in that aura. Even just with average rolling there, you'd get around about 9 mortal wounds handed out over the course of the units. A little bit scattergun, but getting 3 mortal wounds per command point isn't exactly the worst return on investment. If some of those units happen to be really valuable 1-wound infantry as well, then you're going to see a massive return on that. A big 6-inch aura from 1 point does actually cover a fair amount of the battlefield. If you've got a whole mess of enemy units advancing all over no man's land, there's every chance that you could catch really quite a lot in it. However, perhaps the really scary potential comes from Farseers being able to boost the stratagem even further. Instead of casting their psychic powers, they could opt to do a Warp Charge 5 psychic action if they're within 24 inches of said point. Multiple Farseers can attempt this, and for each one that does manage the Warp Charge 5 cast, then you basically get +1 mortal wound for every single one of the units that's damaged. I think it's quite powerful that the Farseers don't even need to have line of sight to the point, and even the initial one doesn't have to have line of sight to put the point down in the first place. It means that your Farseers could still be nice and safe tucked away in a ground floor ruin or something, maybe screened by some other bodyguards even, and still be causing some massive carnage on the enemy if you're willing to spend the CP. I would bear in mind that this would be a bit of a trade-off though. The Farseer psychic powers are generally really valuable ones, and giving up 2 casts on Eldar psychic powers for doing 1 action is going to be a little bit painful, but still at the same time, if you can catch quite a lot of units in that big blast, then I think it's still going to be worth it. At least from the playtester version of the Eldar Codex, it appears that Farseers are getting a bit cheaper, going down to 90 points. So essentially you could see it as the investment of 3 command points and 180 points worth of models for a turn, and then reap the absolutely enormous damage output. Say again, if you did manage to get it off on the same formation that we had in the previous example, catching 4 enemy units of some sort and a couple of infantry characters within the blast. Now every single one that you roll a success on will be getting d3 plus 2 mortal wounds, and taking into account for the lower chance of hitting the characters, you're still averaging a pretty crazy 18 mortal wounds overall, divided out in chunks between 3 and 5 between each of the units. I think it is pretty crazy that it has the potential just to wipe out 5-man infantry squads in a single roll, and despite the lower chance to actually hit them, you still do have a pretty reasonable chance of just sniping 4 or 5 wound characters dead, even more so if they happen to be non-infantry characters. I can imagine it's the sort of thing that your opponent really wouldn't like having cast in the middle of their army. You would be expending quite a lot of resources to make it happen. There could be chances of the enemy denying your psychic actions and things, but just for throwing mortal wounds all over the place, it seems like it's a massive psychological blow. It also might have the potential to snipe some really key units, say for example Space Marines with their company veterans giving character protection to nearby units, and then all of a sudden their characters might be exposed for the rest of your army just to shoot. It is quite funny to think of the theoretical limit of this though. If you're trying to take the Eldritch Storm to the absolute max, then you could maybe cast it with Eldrad Ulthuan alongside 3 other Farseers, a pretty enormous investment of over 500 points plus 3 CP, but if you do manage to get your casts off, then every roll of a 2+ is usually going to be getting d3 plus 4 mortal wounds, an average of 6, and again if that went off on our clustered example above, that'd be an average of 27 mortal wounds in one fell swoop. I feel like that's almost certainly going to be overkill compared with investing in actual units that have defensive stat lines and things. Maybe this is a bit too much investment to warrant using in every single game, but it certainly looks like a pretty terrifying tool in the toolbox that Eldar can just pull out of the bag when they need it, and could certainly irritate the opponent by making them second guess their own deployment just in case they use this big mortal wound bomb. I'm not sure how much realistic impact it might make on the competitive game, to be honest, but there's something pretty crazy about casting what sounds like arguably the biggest spell in 40k right now. So let me know what you think then down in the comments below. Is this overpowered or a bit too unrealistic in terms of resources? And do you think that Games Workshop really intended it to go off on the same turn or not? I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that Aeldari Codex review when I get it out. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention one way in which you can help support Auspex Tactics if you'd like to and you live in the UK. That link is down in the video description, and it leads to Element Games, a discount retailer with 10 to 20% off Games Workshop's miniatures, so a decent alternative to buying Warhammer if you were going to order something in. If you click the link before buying something, it doesn't cost you any more whatsoever, but a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics and helps keep these videos coming. For people over in the USA as well, there is also an Amazon link down there as well. That one works in much the same way, and it doesn't cost you any more. A massive thank you to you guys who have been using those. It can just be a way to help the channel out on purchases that you were going to make anyway. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.